One of the most pernicious tools of authoritarianism is the ability to take language and pervert its use, especially language of justice and racial equality. This is like when they attack CRT and tell you that it's like taught in kindergarten when it's like a legal class, or when they say DEI is about racial quotas when it's a way to think about hiring, or any sort of justice-based language, and then reflecting it back in order to make the in-group, the majority group in the country, feel like the group under siege. And there is a perfect example of this happening right now. And it comes from a really interesting place. The federal government, Trump, wrote a couple of executive orders putting sanctions on a couple of law firms. Now, this is scary for a lot of reasons, but I found an interesting example in there of like warping and perverting the language of justice that I want to talk to you about. One of the two law firms is called Perkins Coie. They are an election law firm, or at least they do election work along with their other stuff. They worked against Trump in the 2020 election, and they worked against the like slate of fake electors thing. So they were obviously a political target of Trump to begin with. In the executive order, he says that government contractors cannot take money or work with Perkins Coie because, among other things, and I'm just going to read this verbatim, racial discrimination, falsified documents designed to weaponize the government against candidates for office, and anti-democratic election changes that invite fraud and distrust. Does any of that sound familiar towards the tactics of the Republicans, and specifically Trump and his ilk? That's because they are, right? Let's talk about the racial discrimination first. On the right, there's this whole idea, both of the Great Replacement, where the white people are all getting replaced by the brown people, and that's super scary. So that gets like hyper accelerated into white nationalism, and you actually see that starting to evidence itself in the real world with 64,000 white South Africans moving from South Africa to the United States, because when a country becomes more equal, the in-group, or the group that had privilege before, suddenly feels like they're persecuted because now they have to be in an equal place. So seeing equality starting to happen in South Africa, they see that Trump is attempting to create a white nationalist state, and so he's using the concept of reverse racism, and it's bringing a bunch of racists over. That's super exciting. On the second one, when they say they falsified documents designed to weaponize the government against candidates for office, he's literally talking about false electors, right? He's saying that attacking the false electors in the 2020 election is illegal and they should be sanctioned for it. So turning that idea of justice around and saying that the Trump administration's criminality is the real deal, and the attacks on that criminality are what's truly illegal. And finally, he says anti-democratic election changes that invite fraud and distrust. Here he's talking about voter ID laws. Those voter ID laws are really bad for poor people, whether they live in rural communities or in urban communities, because not everyone who lives in those communities either has easy access to a DMV or the money to regularly update their government ID. And so it bars poor people, whether they be brown, black, or white, from being able to vote. It's a constant tactic of Republican state governments to try and instate voter ID laws to suppress the black vote around the country. I thought it was a fascinating example, but we cannot overturn an executive order. What we can do is stand up for our people in our states, show up at your local rallies where our real grassroots communities are built, and then show up at the big-ass rallies if they happen to come your way. There were 34,000 people in Denver yesterday. That is insanity, right? There is a movement growing. You are part of that movement, speaking out, bearing witness, doing what you can in whatever way your energy allows, helps to build the flood that's going to make the change. It's going to take a long time, and I really believe we're going to get there. Cool? Cool.